All right, hello and welcome to episode number 1 of my off-season deep dive series. Today we're starting with number 32 on my rankings, and it is the San Jose Sharks. And this might be not surprising to a lot of people. The Sharks clearly have a long way to go, but there's definitely things on this team that I really like, and we're going to dive into that throughout this video. But first of all, thank you so much for, clicking on the video and watching it, and hopefully you enjoy the series. I also have a full explainer for my ranking system posted on Instagram, so you guys can go check that out if you're interested in kind of seeing the methodology behind all of this. But first of all, let's begin with San Jose's off-season moves. And it was a busy off-season, especially on the forward side for the San Jose Sharks. First of all, Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini signing and presumably making the NHL roster. That's good. Like, that's a pretty big step for this team. That's kind of the first push of the real youth movement. Obviously, William Eklund played last year, but Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini are really like the main pieces of this core, and it's good to see them getting an opportunity. And I think they're going to fit in pretty well. Again, we'll dive more into the forwards more significantly in a minute, but they also go out and add Ty Dellandrea in a trade for a mid-round pick. I like the bet. He hasn't really proven to be anything significant in the NHL yet consistently, but he'll get opportunity, so it works. They bring in Barclay Goodrow on waivers, one to get them to the cap floor, but also just as like a veteran to come in. Carl Granstrom and Alexander Wenberg, just kind of depth pieces there, and then obviously Tyler Toffoli, who got the massive contract from the Sharks again to get to the cap floor. But I thought that was a good buy too. As for the departures, Kevin Labanc, who really fell out of favor with this team over the last couple years. He's declined significantly from where people thought he could be, and it was just time to move on. Philip Zadina as well, who isn't listed here, but he's somebody else who was not qualified as an RFA, who they brought in last year. Mike Hoffman, Alexander Barabanov, and Ryan Carpenter, just kind of depth pieces. Obviously, Hoffman was brought in as a cap dump, along with Mikael Granlund last year, and Barabanov and Carpenter just depth pieces similar to Labanc. So I think this forward core has improved. As you can see, I think it's significantly improved based on what they lost and what they've gained. I don't think there's really much of an argument there. I think it's significantly better than it was last season. Defensively, they add Jake Wallman and a second-round pick in one of my favorite trades of the season, of the offseason. Really good value there, getting Jake Wallman, who's really not overpaid. It was a very strange deal for Detroit. Eventually, we'll talk about Detroit, and I'll get into that to their side of it. But at least from the Sharks' perspective, it was a very good deal. It made a lot of sense for them. It gives them a stable body on defense. Didn't cost them anything except for salary cap, which they had to spend anyway. They lose Jacob McDonald, Kyle Burrows, and Kalen Addison. I'd say this group is slightly improved, and obviously Jake Wallman is probably better than all three of those guys combined, but it didn't really address their depth in a way I would have liked to seen. I still think the back half of this blue line is very bad, and so although it's upgraded, I don't think they really did a good enough job upgrading it, so they get slightly upgraded. Obviously Jake Wallman's a pretty big addition, but we'll get into that again when we talk about the defense more in depth. And finally, goalies, they didn't really change anything. They're running the same tandem they did at the end of the year. I guess I could have put Vitek Vanacek in here as he was traded for at the deadline for Kaapo Kahkonen. I think that was an upgrade, so they get that, but it wasn't an off-season move, so it doesn't fall into this one. So let's begin talking about the coaching staff. Ryan Warsofsky, I have rated as a D, and it's hard for me to really rank him fairly. Obviously, he doesn't have a ton of NHL experience before this, and the team he had last year was brutal. So there's not really a ton here for me to grasp onto and say, like, this is why he's a great coach, this is why he's a bad coach. So I think D is kind of where I need to put him for now. This year, I think it's going to tell a lot more, just because you're going to have Celebrini and Smith in the system, and that's going to be a significant upgrade talent-wise. He's going to have competent NHL players this year instead of just like replacement-level players all throughout his roster. So I think that's going to help. But overall, I couldn't really give him more more than a D, which does add a multiplier to this team. It's not just an F, but I don't have a card for this, obviously. But again, this is all, it's explained how much it weighs and stuff in the full explainer thing that I post on Instagram, if you want to check that out. But yeah, it's kind of like the lowest tier that adds a multiplier to this team. This year is going to kind of determine where he sits more or less than that. But coaching's fine. I don't really have much of an issue with it. This team doesn't need like a John Tortorella right now. They just need somebody who's competent, who can help develop these kids. So we'll see if that happens this year. So now we move on to the forward core, and this forward core ranks 32nd overall in the NHL. And the main reason for that, and I need to this is the caveat that I need to put over that, because I don't actually think they're the 32nd worst, their best forward core. I actually think they're slightly better than that. But there's 3 players on here that don't factor into giving this team a rating, and that's their 3 prospects. Mostly Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini, who obviously are going to be, or at least they hope are going to be in the Bs by the end of this season. But they haven't played in the NHL yet, so I can't rate them. The whole thing is rating them based on like what they've done in the NHL over the last couple of years. There's nothing there, so it's hard for me to give them like a projection, because it's supposed to kind of be like the worst case scenario, basically. And the worst case scenario is that neither of them make the team, and they don't factor in at all. So that's what you see at the moment. But obviously, I mean, Macklin Celebrini was my number 1 overall pick in this year's draft, as he was for pretty much everybody. People have talked about his hockey sense, his two-way ability. It's all been documented very well. I think he's a much-needed spark of two-way ability on this team, and it's going to be a big help. Will Smith, same thing. I had him a bit lower than where he went in the draft. I still think, Michkov was the better pick in that spot, but it's fine. Like, I still really like Will Smith. And again, I think he's kind of a very good match for Macklin Celebrini. He's going to kind of add that extra spark of offense and give him a good running mate for the next decade, they hope. And then Tyler Toffoli is the other player I've kind of highlighted here. The big free agent signing for this team, their most expensive free agent signing. Very good veteran piece who's still a super competent hockey player. Obviously, we saw that in Winnipeg. We saw that in Montreal a couple years ago. He's, the Calgary, New Jersey experiments were not as productive, even though Calgary wasn't bad, but it just didn't work out as well as they probably would have hoped. But he's still a super good player. I really like Tyler Toffoli's B+. For me, he's their highest rated forward. And I think, putting him beside Celebrini and Will Smith gives them, that veteran kind of guy that they need. And the thing that I like the most about what San Jose did here offensively is they've placed not just veterans, but they've placed veterans who can eat minutes around these guys. And that's important because if Celebrini steps in and he can't be your number 1 center eating 20 minutes a night, you have somebody like Mikael Granlund there. If Will Smith can't eat 20 minutes a night, you have Tyler Toffoli who can do that, right? Even William Eklund, who proved that he could take that jump next season, or last season. So that's kind of the thing I really like about this team, is that they've put guys around them that maybe aren't first liners, right? Because I don't think anybody's going to sit here and say Mikael Granlund and Tyler Toffoli are first line players, but they're guys who can play in your first line and just eat minutes, right? They don't have to be elite at it. They just have to be able to do it and not completely fall apart, right? They don't have to, they can do it and not have their confidence get shattered because they suck. And that's what, and even Logan Couture, right? If he plays this year, that's a big addition too, right? That's another veteran that you can throw in there, who can play in the top 6 if you need to give one of these young guys a break, throw them on a third line for a game, you can do that. And I really like that about this Sharks offense. Obviously, William Eklund took a big jump last year. He finally got that full-time NHL role, and he looked pretty good in it. We still have him B-. I expect him to get a bit better than that this season. Mikael Granlund was like the real standout performer for me for this team last year. Obviously, he was traded as part of the Erik Karlsson trade, just as like a cap dump. And man, like, they kind of just threw him to the wolves on that first line, and he showed up. Like, if this was the last year and I was doing this, he'd probably be like a C, right? Like, he'd be a full letter grade below where he is right now. But he had a really strong season, and I expect maybe not the same production, but I expect a similar like output in terms of play and kind of more of the underlying stuff. Obviously, his role is going to be diminished a bit with Celebrini and Will Smith coming in, but at least offensively. But I do expect him to still be a very competent top six forward. And it's unfortunate because I think that he would be a pretty solid trade target at the deadline, but San Jose can't eat any contracts, so that's kind of out of the question. I don't think anybody's trading for his full salary. But he's going to be a very good veteran kind of guy for this team too, and he's proven that he can play in that top line role and make it work. Fabian Sutherland's kind of the last piece of that top line that is there, and he's shown strides too of development. It hasn't been as fast as maybe some people would have liked to see, but I don't think, I think he probably grades at the most at like a B+ anyway. So yeah, I mean, he's good in that role, and he'll fit into this top six as kind of a really nice complementary player. And especially now that the core is really starting to come up. I mean, Eklund, Smith, and Celebrini is really the top of this lineup. Fabian Sutherland can kind of like move into almost that Tyler Toffoli-esque role where he can be kind of a really good secondary option and make that work pretty well. Other than that, I mean, Alexander Wenberg I like is kind of a bet to throw in your bottom six. And again, like, Wenberg's another guy who, if they need him to, can move up into this top six and play for a bit, right? Like, he gives that security blanket behind these young players. And I think for what he'll be used for, it's a good fit. Barclay Goodrow even is somebody who can, maybe not move up into the top six, but can play on your third line. If you need to shift guys around, he can play, he can eat some minutes and not be completely useless. Or at least not in terms of on a bad team, right? Obviously, if like the Rangers might have a different opinion of him, and obviously he's the only D on this roster. And I think that's kind of the overall thing here. Is I actually think this team is pretty deep, and that they have some good pieces. It's just a lot of their young pieces are unproven, and that's what weighs down their overall. Obviously Nico Sturm's there. I love Nico Sturm. One of the better defensive centers, at least he was a couple years ago. Obviously, he's not entirely there yet, or there still, but as a fourth line center, I like it. And then Ty Dellandrea, as I mentioned before, is kind of the guy they took a bet on and took a flyer on. And he's somebody else who might creep up into this top six at some point, right? And it's good. Like, I like the direction of where this defense is going, or where this offense is going, rather. And yeah, they're ranked 32nd, and a lot of that's because of having 3 players in your top 9 who aren't getting rated, and 2 in your top 6, and that obviously is going to weigh down your overall. But I like the direction of this team. I think it's significantly better than it was last season, and it's going to be fun. Like, I think San Jose's offense is going to be fun to watch. I think they're making a lot of high-scoring games for reasons that we're going to talk about soon. And I think this offense is going to have a chance to really prove itself and to really see if they can take that next step. And I'm here for it. I think at the end of the year, we're talking about a team that, is going to be in the maybe the mid-20s offensively by the end of this season, right? So that's kind of my ceiling for them, maybe, is that they end up like 25, 26 by the end of the year. And I think that's a positive movement. Obviously, right? Like, they significantly upgraded their offense, and they're still the 32nd best offense in the league. So that kind of tells you how bad it was last year and how disastrous it was last season. Last year, when I did my season predictions, I said that they'd be a really fun, lovable loser team. They weren't. They were just bad. And I think this year, try not to make the same prediction twice, but I think this year could be the year that we see them be the fun, lovable loser team where they're super entertaining. but they're going to lose a lot of like 4-3 games. And this offense is going to be a big reason for that, at least on the fun side. So moving on to the blue line, it's also ranked 32nd. I just have less nice things to say about this blue line. We'll start with the good, and the good is Jake Wallman, who they got for free and immediately becomes what I believe is their best defenseman. He's somebody they know they can put on the ice for 25 minutes and just let him eat minutes up, and maybe not be very good at it, but be good enough. And you saw that in Detroit over the last couple of years, is that he can do that. It might not be, at playoff level, but he's somebody they can just throw out there, know he's not going to completely fall apart, and be fine. And Mario Ferraro is kind of the same boat, right? Like, he's another guy who they can throw out for 20, 25 minutes and just let him eat minutes, right? Like, he doesn't have to be great. He just has to be competent. And they have two of those, right? And I think splitting them up is a good decision. That's how Daily Faceoff has it right now. And I agree with that. I think keep them apart as much as possible, because you need guys who can eat minutes, right? If they both eat 20 minutes a game, that's 40 out of 60 minutes that you have covered already with, somewhat competent defense on the ice. The problem is everything after that. You look at this blue line, and their next two best defensemen are Marc-Edouard Vlasic and Jan Rutta. And that's tough. That's not very good. And that's really where the problem is here, because we talked about the offense and how a lot of the offense was filled with young talent that I was really excited for, right? Like Will Smith and Celebrini and even Eklund and Zetterlund, and you had all these guys in your top six that were just super energetic guys who could take huge leaps this season. That doesn't really exist on this blue line. There's nobody here that I'm looking at and saying, yeah, that guy, he's going to be the next first line defenseman on this team, right? Like, he's going to be their anchor for the next 10 years. And it's not there yet. Maybe Sam Dickinson becomes that, but he's not playing this season. So this blue line is going to be kind of a disaster. And this is why I only said it was slightly upgraded, because, like, obviously Jake Wallman makes it significantly better. But, I mean, everything else around him is just, like, Henry Thorne shouldn't be an everyday defenseman. Ty Emberson shouldn't be an everyday defenseman. Marc-Edouard Vlasic maybe shouldn't even be an everyday defenseman. He grades it as a C- because I think he's slightly better than that D tier, but like, we've seen him decline massively over the last couple of years. That decline probably continues this season, right? Like, Jan Rutta, even, like, if he's your sixth defenseman or your fifth defenseman, even, maybe you're looking at this team as a lot better, right? But if Rutta and Vlasic is kind of your bottom two defensemen, then sure, like, there's something here. But there's too many holes on this blue line for me to believe that they're going to be significantly better than this. I don't think this team moves up much from 32, and there's going to be a defense we talk about pretty soon that's ranked very lowly, or ranked very low, that has all those young pieces and that that excitement. There's really no excitement here. There's nobody on this blue line that I'm like, I really want to see what he does this season, outside of maybe Jake Wallman, because it's a new situation and it's fun. But there's not much else here that gets me excited about this team, and that worries me. And obviously they tried to address that with their second first round pick this year, but this team definitely needs defensive help. I actually wonder if there's a possibility that they could orchestrate a trade with, like, a Montreal and acquire one of Montreal's defensemen, because the Canadiens are just overflowing with young defensemen. That's kind of an intriguing thing for me, but other than that, like, there's really not a whole lot here that I'm super excited about. And Wallman struggled a bit last year. I think his underlying numbers are probably going to go down even more, because he's going to be asked to play such extreme minutes with really no help around him. But yeah, I mean, Mario Ferraro has been good for a while, but he's somebody else who they could trade at some point this season, right? So he's been kind of involved in trade rumors for a bit. So yeah, I don't see this blue line getting much better anytime soon. And finally, we jump into the goalies, and this technically is their best ranked position group. So it's the strength of this team, which I still think is the forwards, but the goalie tandem isn't bad. Like, I don't think it's terrible, and it's serviceable for what they're trying to do right now. Mackenzie Blackwood and Vitek Vanacek. Blackwood really had kind of a resurgence last season, where he had flashes of being like a competent starting goalie. And there's flashes where he just wasn't. And like a lot of that has to do with the team in front of him. At least a good chunk of it has to do with the team in front of him. And I don't see that changing a whole lot over the next like year, because this blue line's kind of a disaster, as we just talked about. But C+ for Mackenzie Blackwood is fine. It's like a really low end starter, kind of like better as like a 1B solid backup kind of role. And Vitek Vanacek is a fine backup. Like a lot of teams would be happy with him as their backup option. But yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about here. Neither of these players are in the long-term future of this team. They're just kind of here to fill the slot up, and they're serviceable for that, right? Like, I don't think this is it's obviously not the league worst tandem that I've ranked, and it's fine, right? Like, it does what it's supposed to do, and I think that's kind of the theme with the San Jose Sharks this year, is that for the most part, the team is set up to do what they're going to do. They're going to be bad. They're going to be a bottom 5 team. It's going to get them another top pick. And hopefully they're more fun than they were last year, right? Like, you let the kids develop, at least up front. And that's kind of the focus on this season, right? The defense and goaltending, just, it is what it is. And we go from there. And I appreciate that that's the role that they're going into. Like, they do not care about winning this season. And that's fine, right? Like, not every team starts the year looking to win a Stanley Cup, right? Like, the goal for the San Jose Sharks this year is to not have 2 10-game losing streaks, and to develop the forwards. That's it, right? Like, the defense and goaltending we'll deal with later. That's basically what this team said. And yeah, the tandem's fine. And I think, like, maybe there's a chance that Blackwood gets moved at some point, and we see one of the younger goalies come up for the Sharks, possibly. We'll see. I think there might be a market for Blackwood, especially if he has another strong start to the season. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the Sharks. Overall, 32nd in both forwards and defense, 27th in goaltending. It's not a good team. That's pretty much it, right? Like, this team has no Stanley Cup aspirations this season. As for a prediction, I think last in the Pacific is pretty strong. I could see them maybe sliding up to second last if we see a huge jump from the forwards. I think saying 6th in the Pacific might be a little strong. I think there's too many good teams ahead of that, but like 6th would be like the absolute cap for this team. I think in the Pacific, they're most likely a bottom 5 team, most likely a bottom 3 team, and it's going to be another tough year. But hopefully the kids can come in and develop and play well, and it'll be a little bit easier for the fans because they'll see the light at the end of the tunnel, or at least start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. There you go. That is the deep dive on the San Jose Sharks. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you're excited for this series. If you did, leave a like. Let me know what you think of the San Jose Sharks roster. Let me know if you think they are the 32nd ranked team in the NHL, because I'm interested to kind of see how your rankings would match with mine. And yeah, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for number 31 because it's coming soon. Have a good one.